One of the complaints I've had with my contemporaries is I feel that a lot of times people do not do unto others as they would themselves. So, for example, if you were a public official 20, 30, 40 years ago, and you felt that you were significant to world events, you would be annoyed if someone didn't know who you were just because they were born 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years after the fact. And this has oftentimes been a common occurrence where we've had polls done that show most Americans can't name all the Supreme Court justices, or in some cases even one. Um, which, to my surprise, actually has happened after the Kavanaugh thing and Gorsuch, which were both. One was more publicized than the other, but it still was the same thing. So I thought about a lot of the comparisons I see between past presidents and Trump, and people always talk about, oh, this is so new and all this original stuff. And you've had people try to laud him that are supporters of his. You also have those who are on the left, like myself, who oftentimes will, put him in the lower category of his predecessors. I will say others, especially the people who have derangement syndrome, like Tom Perez of the DNC, have tried to say that he was the worst that was ever in office, and I'm not partisan enough to. I think I'm well acquainted with what a majority of the presidents have done to reach back and say, maybe this one wasn't as bad as you know, or as good as they're trying to say that he is now because of Trump. Just like when the George W. I think it was last year was found to have a over 50% approval rating, and that drove me crazy because I remember his last year in office with the banks crashing, in addition to all of the stuff that happened before that during his tenure. Lying us into the Iraq War, and that the never-ending conflict in Afghanistan. There's a whole litany of things that we can go into and kind of discuss. But what I thought was really interesting is that oftentimes, when I tend to want to draw a comparison between Trump and a predecessor of his, it's usually Herbert Hoover. But I find it hard to oftentimes articulate this comparison because I know his supporters and a lot of, I don't want to say millennials, but just people who are, 40, 50, 60, whatever, that weren't around in the 20s, tend to not have any idea of who that was. Or at least if they know that he's a president, they can't name anything he actually did in office. And it's kind of funny when I sat here and I wanted to kind of get my material ready for this stream. I thought, oh, let me see if I can find anything that might sort of go along with the comparison I'm trying to make here. Now, a lot of people have obviously been privy to the fact that Trump has been accused of, being a nativist, against immigrants, all of that kind of stuff. And he oftentimes will say, I'm only against illegal immigrants, even though if you remember the one person in here, there was an executive order at the start of last year. I'm forgetting its numbering, but it was within the first 2 weeks of Trump entering office, where he banned people from entering the U.S. that had come over here legally because they were from several Muslim majority countries like Yemen. There are about 6 or 7 of them on that list. But that when you do something such as that, where you ban people who are trying to come here within the confines of the law, which you oftentimes call yourself championing, you can't really find it that hard to believe that people would think you're a nativist. Which that is, that policy was criticized for being such because he runs and says only opposed to legal immigrants. Then you get in office, and then legal ones you try to mess with or stop from coming over here. Um, One thing I wanted to point out, and the reason I brought up that particular issue, is because when the economy was tanking at the start of Hoover's tenure, he had blamed Mexicans for the economic downturn, and had this thing about wanting to get rid of them, and it was called the Mexican uh, repart- repatriation program, which was this mass deportation. I'm looking at the numbers right here. It says approximately 50,000, 500,000 to 2 million people were forced to migrate to Mexico until 1936 after Hoover had left off. So that was continued under FDR for 3 years. Um, but it's this idea of, because you oftentimes will hear people who will say illegal immigrants will take our jobs, all of this stuff, even though we've found that they've oftentimes occupied positions that people don't want. Let's see, completely right. Okay, well, whatever. But like I was saying, you have a system in place where people in the current era are not familiar with that particular policy of Hoover, much less Hoover in general. So that kind of comparison, you'd have to sit down and explain to someone and say, this whole thing about being tough on immigrants, whether they're legal or illegal, goes back well before Trump. And I've oftentimes said that you can't have an individual who is, what's a good term to use, doing things that you oftentimes try to paint as being historically unprecedented, and then get surprised when it turns out to not be the case. But it's due to people not looking up prior examples of this stuff. I'd really argue the only thing not Hoover, that Trump does that I can't draw any analogy with to the past is probably swearing, which obviously past presidents have as well. But I'm just thinking about that Rashida Tlaib thing where they're losing their minds because she said impeach that, whatever. It's just, you know, you lose your mind because someone swore, but not when someone bombed 7 countries, um, and including contributing to a genocide in Yemen that's killed over 85,000 children under the age of 5 for money. So they'll get upset because of someone swearing, but not over the actual policies put in place by the heads of state, these individuals of a higher decorum and all that nonsense. So that's why I can't stand corporate media. They blow up anything that's not actually important. Or if they do talk about it, it's usually the perspective that people are kind of sick of, like with Trump pulling out of Syria when he had Fox and CNN and all the other stations, trying to convince you why it was such a good idea to stay at war. Let me respond to this comment. Oh yeah, that's another thing with the propaganda, where you have the person who will say, "This is doing so," and so during the Great Depression, when Hoover would give his public speeches, and you had these people that were living in these things called Hoovervilles, where they were downtrodden and whatnot. He would try to be reassuring and say, "Oh, this is going good, and you just haven't noticed the results yet." And eventually, you got to a point where people saw through it. He said one thing and then they experienced something else. Just like as this individual says unemployment is down or it's low or whatever, that does not negate the fact that wages have been stagnant for 40 years. And that is completely pushed aside by these people who peddle this number of someone having a job. It's kind of this thing where they're basically telling you just take the crumbs and it'll all get better, it'll all get good. I remember one day when Obama was in office, I had a relative that decided to go down to one of the cities out here in CA, and she was talking about the different people who were said to have been affected by Obama's great economic policies and blah 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 blah. And we went down here, we looked at all these different homeless people that align the streets. I said to her, you really believe that if things are so much better, you can have loads of individuals just sitting here in these crap conditions? And I've oftentimes had to I draw that comparison because the commander in chief during times that are bad, as I've mentioned, 76% of Americans right now live paycheck to paycheck. Um, but when I mention that and I go into that statistic of how many people are struggling even with having these positions, it's not talked about by these politicians and by Trump supporters like the one that came in here, because they know that when you square that up with this idea that unemployment automatically means everyone's doing great, it cracks the narrative. Same thing with gun control. They'll bring up Chicago as this example of how, oh my God, gun laws have failed, ha, and then they act as if it's an island that, you know, you can't, like, no one can bring a weapon from another state into Illinois. But again, when you mention that, it destroys the narrative. It goes against what they're saying, and it just they don't want to, you know, go into the fact. Just like when I was talking about the military budget, you had Trump mention that he'd given the, you know, the largest pay raise in the decade, or the first one in the decade, and then you find out it's 2%. And then you'll have people who will say, you know, why are you criticizing him for raising wages? I'm criticizing it for being too small. And, you know, also completely being left out, because when he gives his public remarks, he won't go into the fact of how much the raise was by, because he knows most people will say, well, that's really, really small, and then, you know, not be that impressed by it. But again, they're always able to hide behind this little house of cards. And I've had to explain that, you know, you had the Dow reach its worst month last year since the Great Depression. Those kind of things aren't coincidences. Um, you have these people who are just peddling these claims, and it's really reminding me of the Hoover stuff. He goes around and says, "You're doing so good, things are going to get better," and bragging about his performance. And then the people who are actually living through it and experiencing it are, you know, they beg to differ. I don't understand why you have. Yeah, I don't get it either. I just kind of accept it. it oh, the theory I had, and I apologize for not being able to pronounce your name, was that there are so many people who are kind of playing the same kind of role when it comes to talking about the news and having the progressive perspective, that you can't get people to watch everybody. Just like I watch Jimmy Dore all the time, and he has, you know, Ron Pacone on there, and that's a person who can barely manage to get a couple of hundreds, and he's going on a channel every day of a guy who gets 100,000 easily. So it's this thing where even in being associated with someone that's doing more, you know, who's more successful rather, it still doesn't translate all the way to you. I also think that I'll piss off a lot of the anti-Trump people, because I'll occasionally give him credit for something that I like, and they get mad because they just want you to have like this hate boner for everything he does, no matter what it is. So that's my response to that. I actually had a person. I'm glad you mentioned. I had an individual who told me that if I just got a better microphone, and if I was, I guess, in some studio like atmosphere, everything would just magically change, and all these people would just sprout up. And now he didn't put magically, and, you know, embellishing a little bit, but he did make these recommendations, uh, and I couldn't buy it, because my whole thing is, if the message itself is not hampered by the format, why would it matter? I mean, if this camera was brighter, you're gonna go, "Oh man, I gotta go look at him. I gotta go check him out." No, you shouldn't. So, I agree with that thing. I've sat here and oftentimes thought to myself, "Is this really always gonna stay this way?" Hey, just kind of accepted it. It doesn't derail me from being interested in this stuff, although it does suck. I actually and I spoke about this yesterday, where I go on Twitter and I share the 717 billion video over and over and over again. But that's mainly, and it received way more views than anything I normally would do. But that is mainly because it's an issue I thought was really important, and that I couldn't accept the idea that, right after Trump signs it and people talk about it for like 2 minutes, within a couple of weeks or a few days, it gets completely ignored. That was insane to me. So, yeah, for the last 5 months, that's been, being shared and getting larger views than anything else I do. But again, that's because of the story versus the person who's actually talking about it. All right, looks like our first commenter is not going to say anything else. I don't know why they do that, where they come in here and they gas you up with all this stuff, and then when you rebut it, radio silence. I don't I fail to comprehend that strategy. But let's dig a little deeper. Um, okay, so we've been over the similarities in the, I guess, the immigration policies, sort of. And I have to say, Hoover's thing was way more blatant, where you just outright start shipping, deporting Mexicans. I'm having a problem with my internet. Well, I hope it recovers or the internet gets better. But his thing was more blatant, where he just says, no, this group is the reason for this. Let's get rid of them. And that, that's not to the extent of what Trump is, because he can always mask it in "I'm for law and order," and I just disputed how that's not the case. Um, but again, when you go and you actually live in these eras, so like for example, I can read a comment like the first one that was written here, and then go around and look up what are the numbers. So the percentage of people that make less than 30,000 a year, as rent prices increase all over the place, and eventually you're just going to have people who just sort of keep ignoring the stuff that's said. I don't know what this has to do with anything. It's irrelevant. Why do you do that? Where you come in here and then you say the first comment was on the topic, and then the second one just shifts over something else. I'm gonna start doing. I'm gonna go to PewDiePie's stream. If he even streams, I don't watch his stuff. I'm gonna go in there, and while he's talking about some video game, I'm gonna ask him, "What is your opinion on the estate tax? Do you support its repeal?" And then see how many people actually want to respond, or if he actually says anything back. I can't even give you credit for that response. I said say something else, and then it's over a completely different topic. I'm so disappointed. I'm just wondering when people are going to realize it. A lot of times I make the mistake of sometimes giving people less credit than what they actually deserve. So, for example, I'll mention that there's this big portion that can't even name a Supreme Court justice, but from what I've seen, people in real life, actual voters, are able to kind of pick apart a lot of the claims that have been made. Like you go out and you talk to people. They did a New York Times article where they were mentioning how one of the mistakes with Clinton running her campaign as being Obama's third term was because you had these people who felt they were abandoned, while he campaigned for TPP, and all these other ideas that went against what they thought were their best interest. So they found themselves disenfranchised, either enough to stay home altogether or to go and vote for Trump or some other candidate that wasn't the Democrat. So it's funny how a lot of times I think what ends up happening is, while people don't actively follow this stuff, to the extent of, oh, here's this new story, here's that story, in their daily lives, they can kind of see the problems that come about from these kinds of things. Just like I was going to, and I recorded this. So you'll have people who will say we can't have higher wages, or we can't afford to increase the wages by $3, $4, $5, and that's going to destroy the world and blah 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 blah. But then they can give the military 717 billion. And actually, that's not even the full number. There was another one in September for 606 billion. So that's I'm running out of numbers here, but people can look at those two things and then see, underfunded schools, or these different, high wages and high prices for different products that are kind of, utilities, and realize maybe it doesn't have to be that way. So I don't know who that one person is right there. But the example of saying that he pushed capitalism too far, again, more ideologue. nonsense. So, if you look at the recent buzz that's been around Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other progressives or people that, are oftentimes maligned by Republicans, they usually don't go into the specific ideas. They just keep saying socialist, 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 as opposed to actually discussing what that person wants to do. So, for example, if I were to describe everything Trump's done in office as it relates to his handling of other countries, I would say it's mostly interventionalism, and then some different instances of being non-interventionalist. And then I'd give examples of this being the case. But if you were to talk to people like the one that came in here at the beginning of it, they would say non-interventionalist, 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 and they wouldn't say that exact word because they would know that's wrong when you bomb 7 different countries. But they would not go into the specifics of country by country what he's doing as it relates to all the different regions, because they get away with being intellectually lazy. They know that they can, go on the internet, say something, and then people will be forced to either respond to it or tune it out. And I've tried to be fair with the analysis that are made here. So I gave you the 2 examples of the different circumstances of, oh, here's the president and his supporters saying everything's doing great, and then you actually are living through it, and you have Hoovervilles and during Hoover's era, and like I said, 78% of Americans that live paycheck to paycheck, wages that have been stagnant for 40 years, all of these different things that I can go into and then mention as examples of how you're fed one thing by the Republicans and by corporate media, and then you live something else. And this stock market thing, from the start of Trump getting in office, I never understood why that was such a big deal. When we know that one person getting a stock buyback that costs billions or millions of dollars can make the market look better than it actually is. When people are making less money, they buy less things, and then these businesses start closing and stuff gets screwy. But when that one person buys something that's very expensive, it can artificially make it look like it's doing better than it really is. Um, and they don't want to accept that idea because it will show them that trickle down economics is stupid. But they don't want to hear it. Yeah, yeah. People, I really wish I could pronounce your name. The real Jazz one. I think it's the real Jazz one. I guarantee if whatever state you're living in, and I know that Republicans like to say, oh, it's because the Democrats who have the governorship and they control everything. Blah, blah, blah. Any state you're living in, you can go and you can look at the various people that are there that are, if they have a house, again, living paycheck to paycheck, as the numbers I just gave you. And those things aren't coincidences. I've spoken to so many Trump supporters that have acted as douchebags when confronted with that statistic. Sometimes they'll say that you're lying, as though they can't Google that exact number and look it up, which I've even been told it's higher. They pretend Google doesn't exist anymore. Do you mean I got it as and I pronounced your name correctly, or if what I'm saying is correct? But they tried to pretend it's not going on, or they try to tell you that there's nothing Trump can do about the most powerful man on the planet. Can just is ineffective on this one issue. And I realize that what ends up happening with these people is they become so devout to public figures that they find themselves excusing those people almost to beyond rationale. I've said it before. When I first became interested in politics, going on 6 years ago, it's about 5 years, 2013. I was a hardcore Democrat, but everything they did was great. Always wanted to vote for them, no matter what election was in. That vote blue to save America thing, I would fully subscribe to that. That hashtag wasn't invented yet, but I always would, cheerlead for this party. And then, when you get to see people that are actually doing fairly poorly by a continuation of ideas that are, either started by the Republicans or done by both parties, you can't do that anymore. You can't say that one side is so great. That's why when I had this guy come on here and tell me that, he lives in Texas and they have the second best economy in the country and blah, 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 blah. And then you find out California is the first. you have to ask yourself, is that due to the number of people that are living there and that are, actually doing things to benefit the system by virtue of just being regular people partaking in a society, or the politician that's in office? Well, I was just getting ready to close this out. I had this guy come in here when I mentioned that, how badly things were doing, and just like I told you before, Envoy, they get the Trump cult where they ignore every single fact or statistic to peddle the same talking points over and over and over again. The stock market could be at 100% or its greatest you've ever seen. If the people can't buy something, it's going to be the rich douchebags buying more stuff and making it look better. Jesus, I don't get why that's so hard for people to get. Because if I'm someone that is running a let me see, you say, "Hi, yeah, that's why happening nowadays. Individualism seems like it's getting worse." Yeah, I told you I've had to, like, for the last 5 months, battle back and forth with both sides. Anytime I mention any crap the Democrats do, I have Twitter followers who go, "How dare you talk about them? Are you trying to stop them from winning the election?" And blah 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 blah. Just, completely trying to mask any responsibility they have for this stuff. Yeah, they just want to bootlick for one side. That's why when I was, bashing, all of the different Democratic presidential candidates, I was saying you can't have people that say how opposed they are to Trump, but then they go along with him on certain things or on most things. Just like with the Arizona Senate race, you had a Democrat who ran against a Republican and won, and I got this individual to come on my page and, tell me how stupid I was for mentioning the fact that the Democrat voted with Trump. What was it, 6/10 of the time, 3/5 of the time, 60% of the time, according to 538. And that fact, he was annoyed by me mentioning, or he focused on me using the phrase "the lesser of two evils" because he calls himself being opposed to Trump as well. So I would think he'd be opposed to politicians who vote with Trump, and they act so they don't want to believe in anything that's reality based. So I gave up on them. When you support one side without trying to understand the order, that's like maneuvering with one arm through life, in my opinion. I don't believe people don't get that both parties not the people at all, just out to fill their pockets. Well, there's a reason why you have about, I think it's like 40% of Americans that are independents. Um, Even if people won't come out and say they're both bought by corporations, they know that neither one is, actively trying to do anything for them. And sometimes they get really cynical with the overall system and just say everybody's screwed up, everyone's bought, everyone is paid off, everyone is trying to advance themselves. I don't know if you remember this, Envoy, but that senator from Tennessee, Corker, the one that retired a couple of days ago, he was the only Republican that voted against the Trump tax cut or its conference report, whatever it was. And then they slipped in a provision that let him save $1 million each year on this property he owned. And all of a sudden, you saw what he just completely reversed his vote. We have to find a way to try and combat ignorance. Very true. I was watching a conservative, and I asked a question on both sides. In honesty, people feel like they're both in bed with each other. Yeah, they just sit there and play their little game, going back and forth. Just like I oftentimes prefer to do news stories and talk about particular issues as they relate to whether it be Trump or the Senate or the House, because those are things that are constantly happening over and over again. And all I can see from a good chunk of my peers are discussions about the next presidential election, to such an extent that they completely drain away any talks of these continuous issues that are changing daily. We had the U.S. here. You had Trump sit here and brag about, "Oh my God, I peace with North Korea, ha 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 ha," and then just last month he slapped sanctions on their top officials. Not a single one of these news networks would mention that, and because they didn't, all of his supporters who don't look for this stuff with any consistency are going to sit there and go, "Yeah, Trump was just trying to make peace. He was doing such a great job," just like the person up there. They have this thing where just anyone can say whatever they want and not even, think critically or dig deep or anything, just whatever. Why is it now, since Trump is in office, identity politics have gone overboard? People are divided. If you remember, Envoy, what Avenatti said about how the nominee for the Democrats should be a Caucasian male or some kind of nonsense, because that doesn't disqualify him, and he thinks he thought he had a chance at that point. That's when I knew that there are strings being pulled in the back. Yeah, people are trying to peddle this stuff. This stream did not go the way I was intending it to go. I was going to have a longer dissertation and probably maybe go into the different things that were going to come about, because I think I told the story before. I had a friend, a colleague of mine that had voted for Trump during the election, and he had said that he did this after supporting Bernie in the Democratic primary, because he thought that Trump getting in office would basically destroy the Republican Party and also a lot of norms that were in place, because he wouldn't, be as crass about it as someone like Pence or Hillary would be able to. And it's kind of been working. We had this Saudi war where what they did in Yemen, and for 2 years of it being done under Obama, people completely ignored it. They paid no attention to it. And a year after Trump gets in office, we're finally getting to a point where Congress might realistically stop supporting them. Now, I think that was brought on more by Khashoggi's murder, but the point is, what he's saying has come to pass in a lot of instances. So it made sense for him to do that to an extent. Divide and separate seems to be the way of govern. When you have people looking at each other, they are not looking at those who are dictating crappy policies. Well, that's been the whole thing the Republicans have done. They've weaponized groups that are people that are much weaker. So, for example, you will have Trump supporters like the one that came in here who will say, "Oh, the illegal immigrants are murderers and they're evil and blah, blah, blah." And then if they're so tough on preventing, let's say, murders and killings of Americans, they're not going to do anything about the daily mass shootings, or the daily shootings rather. Nothing. So again, which happen more often, by the way. But these are the kind of things where they don't think critically, so it doesn't change, and they can still peddle whatever theory they had before, are doing the same. They are doing it more with gender. Oh no, yeah, definitely. They asked Gillibrand, does it bother you that the top Democratic nominees are all Caucasian males? A U.S. senator, and she responded. I thought to myself, of all the issues that you're currently in office to handle, you're sitting here and that's why you can't take these people seriously, because they get in office and then they spend their entire time in there just jockeying for the next job. Just so when they, if they do end up getting the job like Obama, they can sit in there and do half measures and then brag about how great they were, later on. Let's see. Not only gender, but with its madness. Yeah, we could do a whole stream about that probably. I'm not too aware of what's going on in France, in French politics. What's the issue with that? Oh, McCrone. Yeah, good point. The real, if I can call you that, to abridge your name. So, right now, Envoy, the protesters in France have I think it's a 70% approval rating because of the austerity policies enacted by Macron. And there was an instance where he told the various people that lived in the country to buy it's some kind of car that they purchased. But I remember that after getting the car, he told them, oops, and then told them to go and buy another one. And so all of these people literally bought this vehicle and were now pissed off at him, because who has the money to just go and buy a bunch of cars at the drop of a hat? And what's even funnier is that the media in France, just like the media over here, has tried to paint the protesters as being these thugs and individuals that are trying to cause damage and destruction, but they maintain that big approval rating because the people who actually live there, so like not the people on TV, not the little stupid personalities on there that are paid to say something dumb, they realize that the hoodlums that come out are not indicative of everyone or even most people that are protesting austerity over there. And if I remember correctly, I think he tried to cut the education budget or something else. I'll have to do a refresher course on that. But it was I know what you were talking about, the real. And I remember I'd actually done a video about it, about after he lost, about after he won the election against, I think that was Le Pen, the one that was, I think she was endorsed by Trump. And I'd said, oh, well, he doesn't seem like he's that bad of a person. And just now seeing what's happened, I would be very shocked if Le Pen or somebody else that's conservative, a populist, ran again. They wouldn't just get a massive sweep of votes. Oh my God. Oh yeah, well, Envoy, a lot of places don't have the system that we have where, you basically can't run for office until you're almost 70 or 80 because of how much it costs to run. You know, unless you sell out to every donor known to man. An ignorant populace is easy to control. But that's the thing, Daryl, they know what's going on because Macron, to his downfall in this particular instance, that is not a cult figure like Trump. So he doesn't have a bunch of people who are like, I don't care as long as he's part of my party, I'm going to support him. That's why, again, the protesters have a 70% approval rating because they see through the scam or the scheme that's going on. Macron will probably be the same person who would go on TV and say that what's going on right now is great. Just want your thoughts on why it's rising. So, do you think it's a form of control? That's my take. Um, I don't think people are organized to do something like that. I just think it's massive stupidity. It's actually, Envoy. I don't know if you saw Proof Romance is a Scam, but I had I had this one woman I would talk to about like the continuous problem I had with getting someone. And I made the joke that that she was part of a cabal to stop me from ever getting a partner, which obviously, I don't actually believe, and I don't think it's some, huge conspiracy, but it was a joke based off of the idea that like everything was, as you said earlier, this form of control where all these people got together and said, we're gonna make sure you never procreate. And they just never, that's what that reminded me of, that kind of example. It's like, oh yeah, you guys all sit in a little room and decided to mess with me for a little bit and get my hopes up and then dash them. Even though I feel like I think some sort of secret organization does exist. Um, there are organizations, but they're not that secret. Like you have the CIA and it overthrowing all these different governments. And if any organization from any other country did that, the U.S. would brand them the number one target for being evil. So they would don them the moniker of the villains. How dare you go and mess with these other countries and their democracies and blah, 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 blah. And then we do it with, our CIA to Iran in 1953. And they act like didn't even happen. Mohammed Mossadegh never existed. We didn't try to get with Britain for oil. So that's their revisionist history. Just like, revisionist, I don't know what you would call this, present, where they try to pretend as if everything that's bad now is not that bad. I think there's powers that are behind scenes. I also think countries are more in cahoots than we think, but that's just my belief. Yeah, it's called the United Nations. Which, if you wanted to get out of that, you should have voted for Ron Paul in his 2012 campaign. I think he wanted to get out of the UN and NATO, just all the different groups. That's like a big thing where me and him and the Republicans that I like. So that includes Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Thomas Massey, Justin Amash, the different ones that are non-interventionalists. So we bond on foreign policy. They like all of them wanted to get rid of the education department. It's so weird. And it's this big thing, as I said to myself, if this group was so ineffective as you're saying, why would you? What's the point of stopping it from being there? Jesus, man, they think it just that whatever. I could get into the ideology was just attacking that one particular disagreement because I just never could get behind that. They think every group or every organization is evil. But yeah, we're dealing with what I believe is Hoover 2.0, and I think the more people that, if they not necessarily draw this conclusion, but they do point out that we, like back then, are having large amounts of people who are struggling. Almost 4/5 of the country. And just to also throw this out here, I had a user who, when they saw that statistic, told me that every single homeless person was there because of what they did. And I typed his name in on Google and I found his GoFundMe. And I said to myself, this is like conditioning on some sadomasochism level, because here's a guy who is struggling. And look, I had one person who said that I was, doxing this individual. Um, it's not doxing to point out you having the same name on one website as the other website, the same picture and whatever. But I looked this stuff up and I said to myself, here's a guy who is struggling financially to the point where he's asking for money online. And I'm not condemning that, but you don't get to criticize people, a whole bunch of people you don't know, for struggling and then struggle yourself to the point where you're begging for these. Because remember, we have people that live paycheck to paycheck while working full time, which is what that number was consisted of. So if they can go out and do all this working and then not go online and beg for money, and get flack from you for struggling, why the hell should anyone feel sorry for you? I'm just saying that's a Trump supporter who is economically downturned and is going to keep voting for trickle down economics with the idea that you give the rich people more money, they're going to do more with it, and then they take the money and stick it in an offshore bank account and pretend that you don't even exist. We saw what happened with Bezos, where this is a guy who makes billions of dollars a year and his workers are living on food stamps. But that's the kind of stuff where they get tricked into this. And actual people, like, one day I want to just do a documentary. And if I ever did it or do it, it would just be about various people that live in states all over the place. Because if you actually talk to regular people, they see through this. And that's what I hate about this internet stuff. You really get convinced, oh my God, all these people are so dumb. But just regular people, you sit them down, you explain this to them, they seem to be able to pull it up. If they're not, so connected to Trump's, what? I can't wait for them to tell me that's inappropriate after all the stuff he said. I was actually a victim of women who lied and said I was harassing and said something was wrong and something was wrong with me. It's like they use a mob mentality to try and bring you down. Ironically, the same method. Sorry for a long oh, I missed the other one. I truly can take over and drag this country out of the dark age. We have issues with gender. My deal is I want to support, but don't believe in the mantra of listen and believe. Yeah, that Me Too stuff is really, really annoying. Well, that's crazy nuts. Who are progressives also? Crazy people on both sides, to be honest. Wait, Envoy, this might be the first instance of you ever saying to be honest during a stream. So have you been lying this entire time? Has every comment you've written prior to today been some kind of hoax or joke? Has it all been fake news? I just want to make sure. They're also using Me Too against Bernie now. That's why they had that story where they were saying, "Oh my God, his staffers were, we're touching people. He wouldn't go after them. Where? Like, man, come on. You know that one person cannot be held accountable for what a couple out of the thousands of people that back them do. I feel no sympathy. Sorry. It's wrong to put your hands on people that don't, on other people, but it's just as wrong to hold someone accountable for the actions of adults. Bernie was their candidate, not their babysitter. So I don't get it. No, it just came out a few days ago where the New York Times made that claim. Yeah, Envoy, you're an undercover operative. You're working for the female hive mind. The same one that was messing me up with the relationship stuff. It would be funny if like they have two goals. Like one of their goals is to make sure I never get in a relationship, and then the other goal is to, like, get Trump reelected. And it would just be so weird because you always hear about Trump's low approval rating with women. So just those two things together, it's this strange group. You can't tell if it's liberal or conservative. It's just like it's in the middle, ironically trying to bring down another person who doesn't identify with either party. So I think I've made my points. One of the main issues in America is the fact that you can't even have open and candid account anymore since the yeah, that's why I don't like talking to most individuals because they have this thing where they think like the second you say something they don't like, they just lose their mind. Um, and I do believe that when you're part of a group, just like I could be sympathetic to women having periods, but because I'm a man, I've never had one. So when I see one of them exclaim in pain about how much it hurts and it's killing them and this is so terrible and oh my God, this stings, I'm not going to, how you would say, try to make them feel bad for what they're going through because I haven't experienced it and I feel as if there's certainly stuff I have that they will never experience, that if they were in my circumstance, I would not, being a person who's never going to experience this, but seeing someone who is, I would not want them to, then act out in a manner that is not sympathetic to what I am going through. If we all try to understand each other through empathy, we could all go a long way. Yeah. That's why I don't get these people because, I've seen, a couple of Republicans, like the voters who will actually get pissed about, stuff where, let's say, someone is working a job and then they get fired because they said something their boss didn't like or something else, then they'll actually go and donate to a GoFundMe. But that it never occurs to them unless they see it with their own eyes. Hey, maybe other people have had that same problem. Maybe my party, along with the other one, isn't that, I should vet the candidates before I vote for them. I get tired of pretending that women can't do it wrong while they try to criminalize every aspect of masculinity. It makes me tempted to not care about women's issues. Well, here's the thing. The society we live in, which is, remember, Envoy, it's a feminist society and you ain't in it, is built around making one group feel really, really good and the other group feel as bad as possible, as long as it makes the other one seem decent or better than, actually is. Want to be okay. Daryl, your comment was hidden by YouTube because of the swearing. Yeah, that's what I say, Envoy. It's true. These people keep pretending as though things are equal and it's even. I truly believe that if I were female, I probably would have not a single, other than maybe some stuff in school, as far as learning was concerned. Everything would be completely different. I would have probably 100 views per video because I would have my breasts in the front of the camera. I would have been approached 30 times by now, sometimes by people who look better than me, to most others. It would be a completely different circumstance. Let's see. Don't cater to either group. Do what you think is right. But I want to be an ally, but don't want to be because of another group of people doing it. Oh no, you already wrote this. I put it back because I saw it, and I said that's a good comment. I want this put up on here forever, as opposed to the other one, which I thought was goofy. I went when I read that. But yeah, we're getting a little off topic here. I hope that all the points I've made, have been registered at this point. Hope you do in more detail if you don't mind. Yeah, I just have to get around to doing that. I just have to pick a day and then finish it. So thank you both for participating. I hope you do rewatch the beginning, Envoy. I will continue discussing the actual economic problems that people are having, and not really caring who gets pissed or offended by it. uh, because, like I said, this is not the bootlick for Democrats channel, the I hate Trump channel, the go vote for Republicans channel. If one party does something or someone does anything, I will blame them for what they have done. The economic disparity didn't start with Trump. It's not going to end with Trump because he's not doing anything to stop it. But it's time to actually think about the people that are trying to get the highest position. So thank you for watching. Check out some of the other stuff. Let me make sure that's right there. You put this little link here. Yeah, I'll click it after this is over. But yeah, thank you for both participating, and I'll see you later.